27 Celsius, even as far north as northwest Scotland. Now, Saturday starts off similarly, but as we go through the day, there'll be less rain, I think, across southern parts. Still some showery outbreaks around, but otherwise a few drier interludes to be had as well. A lot of cloud elsewhere, increasingly so through the weekend, and becoming a little cooler.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News. The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. In West Yorkshire, heading west on the M62, a lane is closed from junction 27 to 26 towards Bradford, towards the Chain Bar interchange. A car's broken down in the left lane, really slow heading north up the M6 through Staffordshire towards junction 16 at the Stoke-on-Trent turn-off. That was following a collision involving a caravan. All restrictions will be lifted, still causing long queues back to junction 15. On the M4 in Berkshire, one lane's closed, London-bound, 8-7 towards Slough following an accident. On the Surrey stretch of the M25, a car's broken down in the inside lane clockwise, 9 to 10. It's happened just before the roadworks section heading into the A3 exit at Wisley. And in Essex, southwest of Colchester, the A12 closed at the A120 following a serious accident. And in southeast London at Welling, the Upper Wickham lane blocked by a collision off Lovell Avenue. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
How would you like an extra £3,000 in your bank account each month for an entire year? Well, it could be yours with our £36,000 secret salary to be won. You'll get £36,000 in cash to do whatever you like with over the coming year. And the best news? It's totally tax-free, which means you'll get every penny to spend. For a chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB08 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Would you believe it? A German government proposal that they might send people to Rwanda, to the very same buildings that you, the taxpayer, have paid for already. And in France, in an attempt to break the impasse, President Macron has appointed a new Prime Minister. It is EU fanatic Michel Barnier. You really couldn't make this stuff up. The remaining 92 hereditary peers are to be kicked out of the House of Lords. But is this really the kind of reform that we need for the Lords, or should we be going a lot further? Because I think we ought. Before all of that, let's get the news with Sophia Wensler.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. I'm Sophia Wensler with your headlines just after 7 o'clock. The Prime Minister has said he is deeply saddened by the death of a member of the Royal Navy after a Merlin helicopter ditched in the English Channel. The incident occurred during operations with HMS Queen Elizabeth. No other fatalities or serious injuries have been reported. The Ministry of Defence has confirmed the family has been informed and a full investigation is now underway. The Home Office has confirmed it will not use RAF Scampton to house asylum seekers. Labour has scrapped the former Conservative government's plan to house asylum seekers at the former RAF base in Lincolnshire. Home Office Minister Dame Angela Eagle said the plan, which has already cost £60 million, fails to deliver value for money for the taxpayer. Meanwhile, it's being reported that Germany is considering their own Rwanda scheme using UK facilities. Germany's Special Representative for Migration Agreements, Joachim Stamp, said the EU could use facilities set up by the last UK government. Labour cancelled the Rwanda scheme, which was intended to deter migrants planning to cross the English Channel in small boats when they entered office. Downing Street said it would not comment on the discussions between two foreign governments. The government's admitted not all buildings with the same dangerous cladding as Grenfell Tower have been identified. That's following the damning findings published this week. The Prime Minister has pledged to review all 58 recommendations from the inquiry, with a full response due within 6 months. The report heavily criticised firms like Arconic and Kingspan, with families and survivors calling for a swift punishment for those found at fault. Meanwhile, the Metropolitan Police are continuing to investigate potential criminal charges, which could take up to 18 months. In France, the EU's former Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, has been appointed as Prime Minister. President Emmanuel Macron made the announcement in a bid to resolve the political gridlock after the summer's snap election. At 73, Barnier will be the oldest Prime Minister in France's modern political history, taking over from Gabriel Attal, who was the youngest. And in the US, Donald Trump has a job for billionaire supporter Elon Musk if he wins the November 5th election. The Republican candidate laid out his economic vision for the country today, including the creation of a government efficiency commission that he said Elon Musk has agreed to lead if the former president is elected. Musk responded on his social media platform X, saying, "I look forward to serving America if the opportunity arises." Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello there. Well, if you think we've got a problem with illegal immigration, it's nothing compared to what's happened in the European Union since 2015, with huge numbers crossing the Mediterranean and also coming into Europe from the east. And it's really interesting that in Germany, a country that has always tried to be very liberal and tolerant about these things, politics is changing very, very quickly. We saw over the course of the weekend the AfD winning a state election, nearly winning a second state election in the old East Germany. And now today, a proposal that comes from Germany's Migration Commissioner, Joachim Stamp, who is saying what we ought to do is to send people who come to Germany illegally to, wait for it, Rwanda, to go into the same blocks that have effectively been built and paid for with British taxpayers' money. So what's actually happening? And you can go to Scandinavia, you can go to Denmark, you can go to Germany, you can go down to the south of Europe, where you'll find that talk on illegal immigration, political talk, is getting very, very tough indeed. Much being said about removing benefits. And indeed, only this week, the deaths of those 12 people just off Cap Grisnez was blamed by a French politician on the British for being too generous. But in the light of this German proposal, ask yourself a question. Have we gone soft? What do you think? Farage at gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined down the line by Lars Patrick Berg, who was elected originally into the European Parliament in 2019 for the AfD. To think that this is going on, Lars, that there is a serious proposal to send people to Rwanda, is this the German government responding to the rise of the AfD?
Good evening, Mr. Farage. Certainly the government is responding with this desperate move to counter rising and surging public pressure. But it is a desperate move, and it is far too late for a move like that. This should have happened much earlier. And this proposal, of course, focuses on the migrants coming in, illegal migrants from Belarus and Russia into the territory of the European Union. It's approximately 10,000 annually. But what about all the hundreds of thousands that have joined or come into Germany and the European Union in the meantime? So there is no plan. This is a very desperate proposal.
Yeah, as you say, hundreds of thousands crossing the Mediterranean every single year, 200,000 to 300,000 every single year. But I wonder also, so we, of course, as you know, had a Conservative government who proposed sending people to Rwanda, and we had a day when there was an aeroplane on the tarmac with people on it, and a judge in Strasbourg from the European Court of Human Rights said, no, 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 you can't do that, you must think again. I mean, what I'm saying is that it's a political gesture, but would the German government even be allowed to do this?
Well, I think we are currently in a state of emergency that is more important than EU regulations or even partly the constitutional regulations. So in a state of emergency, the government's utmost priority is to protect its citizens. And we, the Germans, witnessed about 2 weeks ago a stabbing and murder of 3 innocent people in Solingen. A couple of months ago of a police officer in Mannheim by a jihadist. And this is happening now on a daily basis. So we are in a state of emergency and something needs to happen immediately. Otherwise, the public opinion will be very, very tough, and it will be hard for the government to remain in office.
Interesting. Lars Patrick Berg, thank you for joining me. Well, that was really fascinating. I really think there's something happening, something very big is happening out there. I'm joined by Stella Santakidou, former advisor to several Labour politicians, and Ranul Jawardena, amongst other things, a former Environment Secretary, quite relevant for the debate about water today. But let's just begin with this. Your native country, Greece, you know, there's been such anger at the numbers coming that the Greek forces have done pushback, have turned boats around. We have the Germans talking about sending people to Rwanda. German politician there saying there's a state of emergency. That means forget what the ECHR has to say. Have we just gone soft in this country with a new Labour government compared to everybody else?
No, I think that while the rest of the European Union right now is looking at the wrong direction, the UK is exactly at the right path. What I find very funny about the AfD is that suddenly the right-wingers in Europe are copying each other's wrong answer. And because they don't have a genuine answer to people's problems, they are suggesting, they're reheating a plan that has already been proven to be bad. Because as we know, the Rwanda policy is too expensive, it's not working. The only reason they are suggesting it is because these conversations have already been taking place with the Rwandan government. The UK has thrown off millions of pounds to the Rwandan government. So, of course, the Rwandan government wants that money.
You don't think, Stella, that illegal immigration is a problem, do you?
I think it is a problem.
You do?
I agree. I think it is a problem. I just think that the Rwanda plan was an ineffective, extremely expensive plan that would have costed us £150,000 per person. That's an insane amount of money.
Well, Ranul, the claim that comes now from Labour is that Rwanda cost the British taxpayer $700 million. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it was certainly several hundred million. But if I'm a GB News watcher right now, and a taxpayer, and I'm thinking the Germans are going to use accommodation that we've basically paid for, I'd be pretty blooming angry.
Yeah, and I am too. I mean, the truth is, the left talk the talk on this and say, oh, it's a bad thing that there's illegal migration, but they don't do anything about it. And we've seen that from this government. They say that they're going to clamp down on it. They've got no plan on doing that. It's really bad politics for them, of course, having cancelled Rwanda. If they believe that it wasn't going to work and we've spent all the money already, why don't they do it and prove that it doesn't work? I happen to believe it will, and this is proof it will, because the Germans are taking our plan and using it themselves. It's a problem for all of Europe.
It's going to be fascinating to see whether the ECHR do intervene and whether Germany just chooses to ignore them, if it comes to pass.
Exactly, and this is what countries across the European Union and indeed across the European continent as a whole have done. The French are the best example of this. They are part of the ECHR. We are too. The difference is we follow every single diktat from this foreign court, whereas they don't. They ignore it.
That's because we're British.
Yes. Yes, we play by the rules.
And if we're British, we join a club, we play by the rules. The last Conservative government was hurt enormously by the English Channel. Hurt politically much more than it was by the legal numbers of people coming to Britain, despite the fact that the legal numbers had a bigger impact on lives. But it was just it's the visual impact of the Channel, of the small boats. It's the sense of unfairness that people are going to get put up in hotels or private accommodation. I don't think that Starmer and the Labour government have any credible plan at all, do you?
I have a genuine question for you. If the chances of dying on the Channel crossings is not enough to deter illegal immigrants who are asylum seekers, so we do not know how many of these people are illegal immigrants. A lot of them are
well, they're all coming illegally.
They are using the only method that's available to them. So under the current law, technically, under the current law, they are asylum seekers. So if the chances of them and their children dying on this journey is not enough to deter them, what makes you think that sending them to Rwanda would be enough? And I'm fine with something like the agreement we have with the Albanian government. My problem is specifically with this plan, with the Rwandan plan. So tell me, why would that be a deterrent?
Well, the idea was that it would be a deterrent, because why would you pay a trafficker €5,000 or more if your feet wouldn't touch the sides once you arrived in the UK? And funny thing is, we had a lot of illegal immigration during the last Labour government, and people like David Blunkett, other Labour Home Secretaries were ruthless. We deported tens of thousands of illegals in the time of the last Labour government.
But even now...
And it did stop for some time, the numbers coming. I mean, this is the point, Ranald, isn't it? You know, how is it that a Labour government could get rid of people who came illegally? In those days, not by boats, in the backs of lorries, literally. And this is where the ECHR has changed everything, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the ECHR has become more and more political. It's, you know, not alone in the judicial sense of making law. And judges are now taking powers that should be reserved for lawmakers, elected lawmakers. I might not like the current government, but they have a mandate to do that.
No, I agree.
And so they've decided, and the people have decided, that the Rwanda plan should be scrapped. It's equally open to the people of this country to change that at the next election. But what they can't change are the judges in the European Court of Human Rights.
No, I'm afraid not. Now, politics in France, extraordinary. What a mess. What a mess President Macron's made of the whole blooming thing. He's been struggling. It's been the biggest impasse since 1945, struggling to get a prime minister that the Assemblée Nationale will accept. And guess who he's picked? Michel Barnier. Yes, the former European Commissioner, the man, of course, who absolutely ran rings around the British civil service idiots, and we finished up with a Brexit deal. There's nothing like, really, what many of us voted for. Stella, I think that the Labour government are going to be thrilled with this, because they want closer relationships with the European Union. They'll see him as an ally.
They want better relations with the European Union. They want France and the rest of the European Union to cooperate, as they have said they're going to do repeatedly, because how else are we going to solve the immigration crisis? As you say, it's a matter of all of these people coming here, so we need to have very close cooperation with them, whether we like it or not. Look, I do not like some of these European politicians either. You saw how they treated Greece. I do not think they are always logically... I do not think that they are always thinking in a rational way, long-term planning for the whole of Europe. But you do need to be diplomatic with them. You cannot go and tell them in their face that you don't like them.
We've never said that. Brexiteers have never said, you know, that south of Calais, the whole thing's absolutely ghastly. We've never, ever said it, have we? I mean...
But we don't believe that either.
No, we love Europe.
No, that's right. We love Europe. We have concerns about the European Union.
We can't stand.
That's right.
Barnier, I mean, he's quite clever.
You've got to admire him, and you've got to love his style. You know, at every difficulty that the European Union or the French government, in this case, face, they call for Barnier, and you know, he is the indestructible politician. Good luck to him. But you're right that Labour are going to now seize this as an opportunity, and you know, they've done what Barnier said before. Well, they'll do it again.
They'll see it as an opportunity, but Barnier, being clever, will make them jump over some pretty high hurdles to get what they want, is what I suspect. That, of course, is if Barnier survives. French politics is in such a mess at the moment, mostly because of the rise on Marine Le Pen's party, and they head towards a presidential election in a couple of years' time, which, and I've said this before, I think she will probably win. Goodness knows what that's going to mean for European politics. Final thought on Barnier. I must tell you this, that whenever I was in the tea room, I'm using that euphemistically, you understand, but whenever I was in the tea room in Strasbourg, Barnier would always unfailingly cross the room. Hello, Nigel. I'd stand up, we'd shake hands, we'd exchange pleasantries. Really, the most incredibly polite, well-mannered, educated man. Just wrong about everything, in my opinion. But he is a very, very smart operator. In a moment, well, we've been promised more new, even tougher laws about water bosses that have earned giant, absolutely enormous bonuses over the years, whilst the levels of sewage spills into our rivers and seas are at a level that is totally unacceptable and really worrying millions of us. And I think this policy, campaigning on this, perhaps explains why the Liberal Democrats have got 72 seats in Parliament this time round. I'm enraged about what's going on, but I wonder, do tough new laws really change anything? And what do we have to do in the future to make our rivers and seas cleaner?
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
What prompted you to go on your incredible journey?
Well, you know, I was fighting my own demons at the time, you know, before I started the walk, and it had been a long journey, if you like. And, you know, I knew that I needed to make a change, and my daughter had just flown the nest. I was a single parent before this, and previous to that, I was ex-parachute regiment. And I knew that I needed to make a change, because if I didn't, I'm not sure where I would have been now, if that makes sense. So, yeah, something just came into my head at the very end of July and said, look, go and walk the UK coastline. And that's exactly what I did. And 6 years later, we've just finished.
You met your missus on the journey as well, didn't you? So truly, Chris, a transformative journey for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, you step into the unknown like that, you know, you have no idea how things are going to work out. You go out with so little expectation, but only really with the aim to, you know, for me personally, to come back feeling a lot better than what I was before I left. And that certainly succeeded. So everything that happened along that journey was one big learning curve. And I got to learn a lot about myself, a lot about, you know, the public and people. And yeah, it was just a life-changing transformation for me. And, you know, I learned so much, and I know what I want to do with the rest of my life as a result of it. And I met the most amazing people, and, you know, worked hard. 6 years of carrying your house on your back isn't the easiest feat in the world, I can promise you that, but it was worth every single step, because, I rescued a dog along the way. I met my now fiancée, Kate Barron, along the way, and we had a baby together along the way as well. So to start in the position that I did and then end up with all of that coming over the line with me was just something that I never expected, and I couldn't have dreamed it up, to be honest.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
As we scrap Rwanda and the Germans start considering it, I asked you, have we gone soft? John says, yes, Nigel, the UK have always been soft since Maggie was the PM. The asylum seekers know their chances of their claims being approved are much greater in the UK than in France, and even if their claims are rejected, it's highly unlikely they'll be deported. You're absolutely right. It's the fact they're not going to get deported. It's the fact we've got benefits for them, accommodation for them, and that's actually what the French government are saying. There is something in what they say. Helen says, how interesting. The Germans see their migration issue as a state of emergency. And Keir Starmer resorts to name-calling millions of his own citizens far right for being seriously concerned. Well, I think we'll hear much more about that over the course of the coming months. Funny enough, if you listen to the BBC in the morning, virtually every government in the world is now far right. There we are. It's quite extraordinary. Now, water, this really, really matters. As I said before the break, you know, I spend my free time on the sea, fishing, boating, whatever. I love the British seaside. I think actually we've seen a resurgence in love for the seaside, particularly since the pandemic. But the idea, and we had a particularly wet last year, the idea that our water systems simply can't cope with excessive rainfall, that we get these outflows of sewage into our rivers and seas that happen on an astonishing scale, I think appalls pretty much all of us. I have to say one of the reasons this is happening, of course nobody else will say this, is the exploding population means the infrastructure we have simply can't cope. That 10 million increase in population since Blair was there. But what is clear is that many people running water companies have made really substantial sums of money whilst polluting our environment. Ranald Jawardner, you were the Environment Secretary. You had to face this problem. Now, it's basically outdated infrastructure, not big enough to cope with where we are.
Yeah, I mean, this infrastructure that we have in this country is basically Victorian. And, you know, the Victorians were streets ahead of the rest of the world. The trouble is we've not done anything since. Yeah. And, you know, when you see even things like reservoirs being blocked by local councils, it's not only the sewage, it's even the water supply that we've not done anything about. But the only reason, of course, we know that there is a problem is that because in the last few years we've started monitoring this. So this has been happening potentially since Victorian times.
Right.
Yes, the population has grown, so that may have created a pressure. Yep. Yes, you know, the rainfall last year was particularly bad and so on. But this has been happening for a long time, and it's right that we sort this out. So, you know, when I was at the Department for the Environment, we did put forward hikes to the fines because the fines had been £250,000 under Labour, not hiked the entire time that Labour was in charge. So I lifted that, I said we're going to lift that to 250 million. The government then went further to have an unlimited fine to make clear to water companies.
And now they're talking now they're saying maybe up to 2 years in prison.
Well, correct. And it's important we look very closely at the definitions here because we've got to make sure it's actually purposeful. We don't want to lock up people unnecessarily. And I think what's going to happen is if people block investigations, then they are liable for criminal prosecution. Fine, let's look at the definitions very closely on that. But the important thing here is we've got to make sure that the firms that run water around this country put the investment in, because that's what we actually want to see. We want to see waterways cleaned up.
We do, but Stella, the only way that we get new investment from these firms is if our bills go through the roof, presumably.
Well, yes, that's exactly the problem that they have with public utilities not being owned by the government, not being owned by the people who will have to actually use these utilities. You have private investors who are going to completely asset strip Thames Water, and then the government will have to come and make do with what we have, which will mean eventually higher bills for the consumer. And we cannot live without water, so we really have very, very limited solutions.
So would you like the government to step in and take control of our water supply?
I would like utilities to be publicly owned. I think that utilities that we cannot go without, they need to be publicly owned. And I would think the same about energy. I'm not saying that right now we need to nationalize every single energy company, but in the long-term future, it does not make sense to allow private investors, what they're going to do, what they do and what they have done, we see it over and over again. They are going to cut as much as they can. They're not going to invest, and they're going to make as much profit as possible.
You know, I know, Ranald, that you want to get in on this because you think the state runs things very badly and it costs too much and it doesn't work, it'll lead to shortages. And yet the failures of these companies mean that Stella's line of argument is becoming tempting for more and more people.
It's worrying that it is becoming tempting, but the truth is, again, coming back to the point, Victorian infrastructure, the state, when it owned this infrastructure, did nothing. And, you know, when the Chancellor, whoever it is, Labour, Conservative, when the choice is putting more money into schools and hospitals or investing in sewers, they're going to choose the former.
But how are we going, you know, to solve this problem?
Well, I think...
And surely it's going to mean much higher bills for many, many years to come.
It doesn't have to. I mean, first of all, we've got to make sure the sector remains investable. And if firms perform poorly, then I actually do believe that they should be allowed to fail. That's the point of having private sector investment. So people have to take.
So do I.
People have to take risk on this.
They should lose their money. I mean, isn't that the point?
Yes, the point is they should lose their money. The problem is that you're allowing a public utility company to fail. So this is going to impact their consumers.
No.
It's not as simple as having the government step in.
No, that's not the way it works. So the consumer gets looked after. The water remains in people's pipes and taps. The government steps in, but the difference is the private sector is the bit that's lost the money. But here's the thing. You've got to retain investability in the sector, which means not putting too many restrictions on things like planning for reservoirs. And, you know, we've got to make sure that
Have we built any reservoirs?
No.
I mean, none.
No, we've not built any. And, you know, if you look at the one in Oxfordshire, for example, this has been planned for decades. There's one in Cambridgeshire that's being planned for decades. No one allows them to happen. Those are the things that we need to get changed. It's not all about bills. It's also about making the system work better.
Maybe the new planning laws that Labour are bringing in, maybe will make it easier to build reservoirs.
I hope so.
You hope so. There we are. Hopes there that a Labour government can do something good. Well, of course. And that's the point, actually, that even though you fight against each other at elections, you do actually genuinely hope that the government of the day does the right thing. Now, just a little minor victory. You'll remember when it was first proposed that RAF Scampton was to be used as a migrant site, and that many of the historic artefacts that were there at Scampton's, things that were owned by Guy Gibson, his office, were being moved and put into storage, frankly, at the Royal Air Force Museum in Hendon. I went immediately up to Scampton. I broadcast this programme live from the Dam Busters pub, and if you're ever in Lincolnshire, you really ought to go and visit it. And I was just appalled that we were going to do this with something that I thought was so historically significant. Well, the plan has been scrapped, but before you cheer, I'm afraid what it'll mean is the people that would have gone to Scampton will be going into social housing or the private rental sector. And frankly, an historic site may have been saved, but nobody will be that much better off. And an interview. British banking. Well, that's until I came along. And she's done an interview, a podcast, in which she insists that her leadership was courageous and honest. Yeah, for me, it's always about acting with integrity, empathy, respect, and treating people well as they join you and as they leave you. Oh, yes, Dame Alison, and yes, of course, you question net zero and don't think, actually, that open borders are a very good idea, in which case, then, you simply get debanked. Courageous and honest, sorry, don't believe a single blooming word of it. Well, there are 92 hereditary peers left in the House of Lords, and the proposal is simply to get rid of them. That is what Labour want to do. Will that give us a smaller House of Lords? Will it give us a better House of Lords? Is that really the kind of reform that we need? Or should we be thinking much, much more deeply about the important second chamber? Lord Strathclyde joins me in just a moment.
Hello again, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's been a miserable end to the day for the south and southwest, and we'll see further spells of heavy rain during the next 24 to 48 hours. Around this area of low pressure that's sitting over the continent, that's pushing some weather fronts up into the south, but they are tending to stall. Having said that, overnight, the heaviest of the rain will tend to fizzle away for a time. Still some heavy showers around towards the southeast, Wales for a time. But otherwise, a lot of cloud across the UK, especially in the south and the east. That low cloud will lead to a misty start in places on Friday morning and a mild start, 15 to 17 Celsius, a muggy night to come for many of us. But it's not going to be cloudy everywhere. Certainly towards western Scotland, we'll see blue skies first thing on Friday. Plenty of sunshine out there and already a warm start to the day. It's going to get warmer as the day progresses. Northern Ireland seeing some decent sunshine, particularly towards the west. Likewise for southwest Scotland, Cumbria, Lancashire, North Wales. These are the areas where we didn't see much summery weather during the summer, but on Friday and Saturday, we'll see plenty of warm sunshine instead. The Midlands, East Anglia, some sunshine for a time, but across South Wales into the south of England, mostly around the M4 corridor and southwards, there'll be thick cloud and there'll be heavy outbreaks of rain on and off through the day, increasingly focused across parts of Somerset, Devon and Cornwall. That could cause some issues, localised flooding, transport disruption, that sort of thing. But elsewhere, we've got the sunshine, 25 to 27 Celsius, even as far north as northwest Scotland. Now, Saturday starts off similarly, but as we go through the day, there'll be less rain, I think, across southern parts. Still some showery outbreaks around, but otherwise a few drier interludes to be had as well. A lot of cloud elsewhere, increasingly so through the weekend, and becoming a little cooler.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets at My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Well, unsurprisingly, the Labour government is set to banish the last 92 remaining hereditary peers. Now, the House of Lords has become absolutely gigantic. There are 805 members of it. And don't forget, they did this back in the 1990s. They got rid of hundreds of hereditary peers. And what did they do? Well, Blair appointed 374. Cameron appointed 245. So they got rid of the hereditaries and filled it up with their mates and party donors. And I don't think the standing of the House of Lords has ever been lower in British public opinion than it is today. People can see it, sadly, for what it is. It's being used simply for patronage. In my case, a totally corrupt attempt to try and buy us off a few years ago before the 2019 general election, which I refused, but quite disgusting. Tom Strathclyde, Lord Strathclyde, former leader of the House of Lords. 92 of you survived the last cull. This is the end of the road.
Well, I very much like your introduction because you laid out exactly what the problem is. That the hereditaries got kicked out at the end of the last century. 92 were sent behind, and all the Blairites did was to stuff the House with their cronies, with their placemen, and that's what they're going to do again. It is too rich a target, and so they want to get rid of 40-odd Conservatives, 30-odd crossbenchers, and that's the opposition, and then they will replace them with their own people. I fully expect 50 new peers to be created over the next few months by Starmer and his gang. That's why it's important, and then we will never get the kind of proper reform that would really serve the interests of this country.
I mean, clearly you'd like to stay in the House of Lords. You've been a very active member of it and held senior position in it. But if we are going to have a wholesale reform or a reform of the House of Lords, what do you think the right thing to do is?
Well, what I said this morning when we weren't discussing, because I didn't want to discuss it, I managed to get the Lord Speaker to drag them to the dispatch box and make some kind of a statement, was if it's all about numbers and you just want to get rid of a few people, why not get rid of the 100, 200 people who hardly ever come to the House of Lords because they are disinterested, because they've got nothing to say, because they're doing other things.
Or they're 93.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, it's Labour who have proposed an age limit, but there's nothing in this bill. Or toughening up the appointment system. I mean, we're going to have a second chamber where the only way in is because the Prime Minister has ticked your name in a box.
Yeah.
I mean, not many countries that do that.
So should we move to an elected chamber with expert committees? Is that perhaps the way to go?
There are a few choices. One is elected, and I'm actually quite keen on an 80% elected House. 20% I respect are people who do not want to be elected. Perhaps civil servants, trades unionists, captains of industry, ambassadors, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure you don't like that, but
not much.
But they do have a place and a purpose in government. But
predominantly elected.
Yes. I mean, what's wrong with people electing their political representatives. Other countries do it.
I think Lord Strathclyde makes a very powerful point. I mean, this is not really reform, Stella, is it? I mean, it's not, is it?
No, I think I agree. I think that you are making some very good points about having elected representatives. Although I still think, even though it is a very foreign, bizarre system, I do think there is a value to knowing that you're going to have experts. And the problem I see with experts is that very often they are not very good at doing politics. So they're not going to be very good at getting elected. At the same time, you do have to do politics to be picked by the government of the day to be placed in the House of Lords.
You can, through committees, appoint whatever experts you want from whatever field
they can't vote.
It may
it's
be.
Not the same, and they can't space.
And they can't be ministers.
Yes, exactly.
I don't know. I think anyone can be a
minister.
And
I do think there is value in having ministers who are in the House of Lords, who, they're not elected members of Parliament.
Well, Janel, I mean, your lot, you've actually, the Conservatives have appointed more peers than Tony Blair did now, if you add them all up over the years. I mean, it just looks corrupt as hell.
Well, look, I mean, I think the point is...
Doesn't it?
Well, clearly, there have been many stories on that sort of line of thought. But the bigger point here is, given all the problems that this country is allegedly facing, according to the Labour Party, why are we going to expend a huge amount of political time right now on removing 90 people from the House of Lords? If the situation is as bad as Rachel Reeves keeps saying it is, if they have a plan on migration, which Yvette Cooper says she has, why aren't we dealing with those problems? Why are we bringing forward a bill now?
Well, you could have argued that back in the 90s.
Correct.
But I think the government would view this as being a popular measure.
I don't think anyone cares.
Well, it's not top of the list. Yeah. And there's a bit of envy creeping in there too.
Absolutely.
But here's the argument I've always heard over the years against an elected or predominantly elected House of Lords. And it is that it would then become a very direct competition to an elected House of Commons, and that you might finish up, with a situation where nothing was accepted by the upper house that had gone through the lower house because of different election cycles. How would we perhaps do it differently and have a 1-year, 7-year term or something like that?
Very possibly. I mean, I think there are lots of different ways of looking at it. And in 2012, there was a proposal for an 80-20 House, which ultimately didn't get through the House of Commons, precisely for the reason that you laid out. And that's a perfectly good point. But the more serious point is that constitutional change in this country is normally managed on a cross-party and consensual basis. People getting together, working out what the problems are and deciding on what the right way should be for doing it. That's what happened 25 years ago, when the then Lord Chancellor, Lord Irvine of Lairg, made a solemn undertaking that the 92 would remain behind until Labour came up with their proposals for change, and they had a royal commission.
Yeah, and we haven't got any.
No, nothing happens, and nothing will happen again if the hereditary peers are flung out.
I sense that is absolutely right. He's right, isn't he?
No, I think that this is a very good first step, and it's small enough so that it doesn't waste too much time.
But what's to come?
Well, it's interesting that if they feel so strongly about reform of the House of Lords, they're not dealing with the age limit, they're not dealing with the bishops in the House of Lords.
Which is it?
I might have a different position to Labour on this, but if they believe in this, these are the things they tackle right now, and expend a huge amount of political time in doing that.
They're going to fill it up with party donors and mates, aren't they? Come on, Stella, that's what's going to happen.
Do you want them to spend too much time on this, or do you want them to spend less time on this because there are more important problems?
Well, then they shouldn't do it at all.
Surely the people who definitely should not be in the House of Lords are hereditary peers. And then you can go ahead and look at other reforms, but surely we can all agree, if your dad or your granddad was a peer, you do not deserve to be in the House of Lords just because of that.
Well, they're the elected ones, of course.
Well, ironically, for reason, and this is perhaps explained to the audience how oddly the 92 are elected.
I know, it is very odd, but in 1998 they were basically all flung out. The Labour Party agreed that 92 should stay behind, and they were elected by their peers to do so. So arguably, they're the most democratic part of the House of Lords.
You now have by-elections.
Well,
they do.
Yeah. I mean, they have now been suspended because, so but there's no hereditary peers. I have no means of passing on to my heir, my seat in the House of Lords.
Not now.
So that doesn't happen.
No.
So it's all gone. And that's why the Labour Party are making a mountain out of a molehill. It is an old-fashioned political scam. It is partly class-based, and it's a desire to get rid of the opposition in the House of Lords so they can control the second chamber as effectively as they control the first.
Well, I'm afraid they have a whopping great majority in the House of Commons, and I think this will simply happen. Lord Strathclyde, thank you very much. Stella Ranald, thank you for joining me. In a moment, I've been joined by energy expert Clive Moffat. We're going to take a deep dive into GB Energy, what the legislation actually says, will it work? And in particular, what I want to focus on is this promise that more renewables will give us cheaper energy for the future. Because I've got to tell you, I am very, very sceptical indeed.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
You'll relate to this one. We've all been there, haven't we? Tensions high in the car as you head off on the latest adventure or holiday during the summer break.
Now, with the average family set to spend about 3.5 hours a week together in the car driving on the roads during the holidays, new research has shown that our relationships could be tested to the limit.
Yes, figures show that 21% are having arguments for simple things like the driver going the wrong way, which we were saying is not actually very simple. That's very serious.
I was going to say that. I'm surprised it's just 21%.
Yeah.
So if I was going the wrong way down the road,
you'd know about
you'd hear from me.
A further 20% squabbling over how their partner drives, yes, and 25% admitting to being more prone to rowing when their kids are misbehaving. It's a lot to deal with, isn't it?
Fair enough.
Well, we're joined now by dating and relationship coach and author Persia Lawson. Good to see you this morning, Persia. What is it about being in a car that just makes things so tense?
Well, I think it's probably quite obvious, isn't it? It's the fact that we are in a confined space, we can't go anywhere, and it can just really create so much tension and stress, especially if you and your other half or a family member, whoever you're in the car with, are going through a little bit of a tricky time. And if it's really hot outside, that doesn't help either. So inevitably, it creates a lot of irritation and bickering, I would say, from my experience.
And what is it about children? If you add children into the mix, it just makes things very, very difficult, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of, are we there yet?
Yeah.
Kicking the back seat and just squabbles, kicking the siblings. So adding children into the mix is just going to turn the heat up on that tension.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christys tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christys tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's an issue that's going to get bigger and bigger over the course of the next few years. It is, of course, about the cost of energy. It is about energy security. It's even at times a debate about whether the lights will stay on, and that's all because GB Energy is being launched by the new Labour government, and they've really gone back to the Boris days of saying, let's become the Saudi Arabia of wind. Well, I'm very pleased to be joined by energy analyst, founder and chairman of the UK Energy Security Group, and friend of this programme, Clive Moffat. Clive, first things first, you came in about 11 months ago when we chatted. There was an auction for commercial companies to bid to put wind farms in the North Sea. Not a single bid was received.
Correct.
This week, 171 bids for onshore, offshore, even floating experimental.
Yeah.
How have this government been so successful at getting people to bid?
Well, they
for
put
wind
up
farms?
the guaranteed strike price, almost doubled it, up to £72 per megawatt hour. So that got over one of the biggest hurdles, which was the cost of capital. Most of these projects are 80-20 in terms of loan versus equity.
Yep.
So attracting big institutional investors is important. They're looking for, since interest rate rise, they're looking for more than 10%. So that plus a lot of supply problems was causing problems for developers. But even so, I still think that it's just the beginning of what will be an increasing demand by developers for an even higher strike price as we go forward.
And a higher strike price has got to mean higher energy bills.
Indeed. That's exactly right. And it's one of the biggest threats is that the cost of energy will increase because I think we are at a situation where they got only that recent auction, it was 5 gigawatt of offshore. And Greenpeace pointed out that's basically half what you need per year to reach the target of 50 gigawatt of offshore wind by 2030.
It's unachievable, isn't it?
It's unachievable. It's not going to happen. And so to force the pace, the Labour government may well decide, well, we'll throw more money at it.
Yeah.
So it would increase the price again. Yeah. And as you quite rightly say, we are almost at a tipping point between the price of electricity and the price of the strike price. Mm-hmm. The value of the strike price, where in fact we're going to get into an area of subsidy and payments into energy bills by customers. So I think that is an issue, yes, definitely. But
and the concept of GB Energy, the concept of this big company that's been set up, have you had a chance to look through this and really examine it?
Well, it's at the heart of the dedication of the government to effectively decarbonise fully the electricity system by 2030. But it's very small. It's a drop in the ocean. If you compare what, in fact, is required in terms of billions of pounds of new investment to meet the volume targets that have been set, the GB Energy is actually a drop in the ocean with its 8 billion.
Right.
So effectively, and also we don't know the projects or the technologies that they're going to be involved with. But my feeling is that it's not going to make a heap of the difference to the actual achievement of the volume target. I think the issue about security is very important. I think there are two issues here. One is, what does that target for 2030 mean for energy security? And what does it mean for energy costs? Now, for security, it's a major issue, because if we don't achieve the volume target and we basically don't do anything to underpin gas, there are 32 gas stations in the United Kingdom, of which 17 of them have reached the end of their economic life. Another 7 will reach the end of their lives by 2030. So you could end up with a rump of only 7 active operational gas stations providing essential flexible supply of power with only 10 gigawatt of capacity. So we have a serious issue about what happens if we have intermittent problem. So what happens if you have that intermittent problem when you've written off gas off the system?
I think logic suggests the lights go out.
Energy rationing. And I understand that there are certain members of the National Grid Board who are forecasting that blackouts, rationing may well happen by 2028. So we have a situation where the government is taking enormous risks with security. The other option, of course, is to import power. And we have been doing that. Last winter we did that. But that can be very expensive. It might not be available because the rest of Europe might want the power as well as us. And you end up with a situation where we're having to pay on a daily rate, that price can rise to £2,000 per megawatt hour.
Yeah, which is...
And compared to a spot price for wholesale power of electricity here of around 130. So you have a security fundamental problem. And on costs, there are 3 cost elements. We've mentioned one, which is the cost of subsidies for renewable generation. The second one is the cost of grid. How much is it going to cost to reconfigure the grid to take the wind from up there down here?
We have to build enormous pylons from Essex, Suffolk, Norfolk, Lincolnshire, Yorkshire.
And the National Grid have come up with a budget which they consider to be able to fast-track offshore wind from north to the south at 50 billion. But nothing's been much spent on that 50 billion so far. So you end up with a situation, well, let's assume that Ed Miliband achieves his volume target for renewables and all that quadrupling of offshore wind, tripling of solar power and doubling of onshore wind is achieved. You still might not be able to get it transmitted. So there's a gap, there's a problem with that, and that's a cost. Somebody's got to fund that cost. And the other problem is market balancing, as we said. These are intermittent suppliers.
Yeah.
There's two issues. The import cost of electricity can be very high, and the other cost is particularly if you can't transmit the power, you've got a constraint problem. You still have to pay the developers. Now, in 2021, that cost was 400 million. Grid are estimating that could be 2.5 billion by 2025, 26.
Clive, you're somebody who understands this industry inside out. You're giving us the warnings of what could happen, what could go wrong. We're not having a proper national debate, are we?
It's very sad that you and I have been discussing this for a long, 2 years?
Yeah.
And I think we discussed then that advocacy of policy has overtaken robust analysis on this subject.
Yeah.
And still does.
Yeah.
There was a debate this afternoon in the House, as you know.
Yeah.
And about GB Energy.
Yeah.
And we still haven't had a comprehensive set of estimates which look at the whole thing of the project in terms of costs and benefits.
But the whole political class, Clive, well, nearly all of them, are taken in by net zero, the belief they're saving the world. That's what's really behind all of this, isn't it?
There's a doctrinaire approach here, and I think Mr. Miliband is an exponent of that doctrinaire approach. I had hoped that there are people within the Labour movement, like the GMB Union, Gary Smith, who I know, who would have said, hang on, there's a warning here. We might not be able to get the grid up and running the way you want it for 15 years, not 2030. So we have to take a more cautious, maybe a more balanced approach. But that is not happening.
Clive Moffat, as ever, it's always an absolute pleasure to have you on. We always get an enormous reaction from our audience whenever Clive is on, because he actually knows what he's talking about. And as he says, so much of politics is just doctrinaire, not based up with facts. Now, Jacob Rees-Mogg has gone through a slight transformation. In fact, it's Miriam Cates, former Conservative Member of Parliament, here this evening. Miriam, welcome.
Good evening, and yes, I am Jacob Rees-Mogg tonight.
What are you going to be discussing?
Well, we've got an exclusive interview with Catherine Birbalsingh, Britain's strictest headmistress, talking about the relationship between good discipline in school and great results, and her fears for the Labour government and the kind of change they're going to bring. And sticking with the education theme, we've also got a London mother coming in to talk about her fight to see what her children are being taught in school. In fact, she's had to go to court to find out more.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, those figures that were out from the British Social Attitudes Survey earlier this week, showing that, that a majority of the under-25s think British history is appalling and they're ashamed of it. This is education, isn't it?
Absolutely, and we know that lots of children are coming out of school having been taught that we should be ashamed of our history.
I know.
Not even taught the truth about history. And I suppose the question is, at what point do we have to say we should be able to see what's taught in schools and enough is enough?
And quite right that parents should. Thank you. But before that, let's have the weather with Aidan McGibbon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's been a miserable end to the day for the south and southwest, and we'll see further spells of heavy rain during the next 24 to 48 hours. Around this area of low pressure that's sitting over the continent, that's pushing some weather fronts up into the south, but they are tending to stall. Having said that, overnight, the heaviest of the rain will tend to fizzle away for a time. Still some heavy showers around towards the southeast, Wales for a time. But otherwise, a lot of cloud across the UK, especially in the south and the east. That low cloud will lead to a misty start in places on Friday morning and a mild start, 15 to 17 Celsius, a muggy night to come for many of us. But it's not going to be cloudy everywhere. Certainly towards western Scotland, we'll see blue skies first thing on Friday. Plenty of sunshine out there and already a warm start to the day. It's going to get warmer as the day progresses. Northern Ireland seeing some decent sunshine, particularly towards the west. Likewise for southwest Scotland, Cumbria, Lancashire, North Wales. These are the areas where we didn't see much summery weather during the summer, but on Friday and Saturday we'll see plenty of warm sunshine instead. The Midlands, East Anglia, some sunshine for a time, but across South Wales into the south of England, mostly around the M4 corridor and southwards, there'll be thick cloud and there'll be heavy outbreaks of rain on and off through the day, increasingly focused across parts of Somerset, Devon and Cornwall. That could cause some issues, localised flooding, transport disruption, that sort of thing. But elsewhere, we've got the sunshine, 25 to 27 Celsius, even as far north as northwest Scotland. Now, Saturday starts off similarly, but as we go through the day, there'll be less rain, I think, across southern parts. Still some showery outbreaks around, but otherwise a few drier interludes to be had as well. A lot of cloud elsewhere, increasingly so through the weekend, and becoming a little cooler.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is your chance to win a £36,000 secret salary in the latest Great British Giveaway. That's like having £3,000 each month for an entire year. Extra cash in your bank account that you can do whatever you like with. Take a year off and keep it to yourself. You don't even need to tell the taxman, as it's totally tax-free. For a chance